Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Tanks with CS. I guess, luckily, I just happen to have the time and resources this week to try to pump out more videos than usual, if you will. And hopefully, I can do my part to contribute to the community, if you will. So, anyways, today's video's on the shorter side of things, and it's also kind of unusual because it's not really a review video, and it doesn't really deal with the simple mechanics of gameplay, but much rather it's more of an expose and showcase of how the gameplay environment has become in tanks nowadays. And I hate to say it, but for the most part, it's not a good thing. Some people might find the experience in game to be frustrating or disappointing or infuriating, and I think those things are relatively hard to describe and, quite frankly, pretty difficult to experience unless you see it for yourself. And perhaps you walk in the shoes of the sucker who happened to experience it firsthand, unfortunately. Anyways, so for today's first video, I mean my 1-to-1 Chinese tier 10 medium tank, and we are playing on highway. Obviously I'm top tier, and I believe in this game we have tier 9s and tier 10s but no tier 8s, so it's not the best or the worst matchmaking this tank can have. I guess for people who are not or much better for people who have not experienced the way this tank plays, they will assume that perhaps I kind of made a mistake by going to the city and medium tank. But here's the thing about the 1-to-1, as is the case with many Chinese medium tanks, especially high tier in tanks, is that they essentially shares the camo and mobility characteristics of the Russian mediums, which are good. Firepower wise, they usually have the biggest gun you can mount a medium tank, or quite frankly sometimes the biggest gun you can mount even a heavy tank. And so to sum up, they are essentially agile, mobile, low profile, relatively well armored, and lower profile tanks with pretty good firepower. That's most usable and especially usable in brawling situations, and in particular in close range. One way to look at it is the fact that they have relatively high alpha, relatively long reload because individual shots hit harder, and their gun handling is not great, partly because they are essentially smaller tanks carrying big guns, so they're kind of derpy. So essentially, when you are, or much rather, when you could get into situations in which you can essentially use your good alpha but comparatively superior DPM in comparison to the heavies, and your good agility, if not also your trolley armor, you can usually do pretty well. You can either provide a pretty solid DPM boost to heavies for your allies, or much rather you can essentially simply outmaneuver and outplay the enemy heavies, despite the fact that you don't really have the armor to tough it out. Your sheer agility can usually do the trick. So far in this game, I have kind of locked out simply because I essentially went to the single most dangerous spot on the entire map, which is this courtyard on the southeastern corner or much rather southeastern portion of highway map, if you will. But ultimately, you know, if you got the DPM for it, if your gun has a bloom for it, and you can usually turn the tide of the battle for the better. Sure, I mean, you run the risk of being annihilated, but I suppose at this point I was naive enough to trust my team to be there for me and to provide support and to ensure that, you know, my own team's, you know, high DPM, the highest tier medium tank can live longer to essentially make short work of the enemies. I know it's a theoretical argument, but it's also, you know, essentially wishful thinking, if you will. And I hate to say, but I think ultimately the mobility and agility for this tank counts for armor, or much rather, you know, it kind of functions well in its own merit, or should I say its own way, in armor's place, if you will. Just simply because, you know, sure, many enemies you face might have more armor, but they ultimately lack the maneuverability to decide how they want to position themselves, how they want to angle themselves, and how they want to engage you. Much rather, you can simply drive around them and negate the angling and positioning of their armor. Not to mention, you know, specifically speaking, the 1-to-1, you know, has a 440 alpha gun that reloads essentially around 8 seconds flat. But ultimately, my luck ran out after I got cornered by the enemies. I hate to say, but you know, their light tank essentially can outmaneuver a medium tank, and he got around me, even though I had no choice but to engage their heavies first. And I succeeded in that regard by derping their low health heavy with a high explosive shell and killing him. Unfortunately, and I hate to say, but by the look of it, my team was just simply too incompetent and apathetic and in a fog to care, and to be in the right spot to do their part. And, you know, you can argue that their degree of idiocy is way too great for them to effectively function as a force multiplier for someone like me. Not that I'm even that good, but welcome to tanks. And for today's second replay, I'm in my IS3 Soviet Tier 8 heavy tank, and unfortunately I'm bottom tier, and the map's Himmelsdorf, Winter Himmelsdorf to be exact. Even though the IS3, it's relatively well armored for its tier, and it's got a pretty reliable gun for its tier, and the mobility is pretty decent for heavy, you know, it does struggle with its bottom tier. I mean, sure, you know, you can argue that the IS3 is probably the best tier 8 tank to play in a tier 10 match, because, you know, its balance of firepower, mobility, handling, and protection, it's relatively usable and flexible regardless of the matchmaking. And that's very much true. But still, you know, ultimately you will see that, you know, I can do a lot, but then and again, you know, there's only so much I can do. So I decided to go up on the hill, because, you know, obviously if I didn't go up on the hill, you know, the meta in which this map can be played is very predictable, because there's also the train yard on the west side of the map, and there's the tank valley, or should I say alley, on the central eastern part of the map. But because the tank alley is such a choke point, and it kind of forces you to a frontal engagement, whether or not you will do okay there and whether or not you can survive depends on how much raw armor you have, how much raw health count you have, and how much raw penetration and alpha you have, which obviously in this matchmaking I really don't have enough of. And I also didn't go for the train yard simply because the IS3 kind of has a very questionable and short view range. So if I do encounter enemies there, most likely they're gonna see me before I see them. Not to mention the fact that my tank is heavy means that yes, you will essentially have questionable camo, and you will make a questionable situation worse. And of course, even if I did end up going to the train yard, and I'm kind of forced into a sniping situation, I can tell there's no way in hell you can outshoot the tier 10 in your IS3. As decent as the handling of the IS3's gun is for what it is. As you can see on the hill, there's two sides to the castle, so there's always a chance to use my mobility and flank. The engagement range against enemies is relatively short, so tier 10s that we run into here don't really have that much of an advantage. And also vision is not an issue. But in a sense, looking back at a later time, essentially what's happening on the hill right now is essentially the enemies fighting a delaying action. Not even a fighting retreat, because their presence on the hill is pretty solid, but much rather they can effectively tie down a good portion of my team, while the rest of their team can work hard to annihilate the rest of my team. And being a tier 8, there's not that much I can do. And for some reason, my team's JP100 decided to go hill, even though, I felt that his armor and high alpha could have done wonders in the tank category. Or much rather, he can even snipe across the train yard if he wanted to. But nope, he's up here. Looking back right now, I think ultimately the fact that the guy is even here is really a bad sign, because his tank is really mediocre when it comes to mobility. So in other words, it would have been a pretty long and slow drive for him to get up here. That's really a lot of time in which he could have been functioning as a HP sink or a tank elsewhere on the map. Perhaps a spot where his armor would be useful. A position that's under heavy contention by the enemies. But nope, he just simply took the leisurely drive up the hill and unfortunately kind of negated his own usefulness. So right now, for a brief moment, I thought that my team was leading and winning. We have 5 tank versus the enemy's 4, even though the balance never lasted. And unfortunately, the enemy have started to cap. And out of the 4 tanks my team still have, 3 of them are on the hill. One is JPE, the other one is a Swedish tank destroyer. And I will say that, it's an unfortunate situation, and it's also arguably a popular misconception. Or much rather, even a predictable mistake, to see that those tanks are being played as passive snipers and campers. I mean, because ultimately the JPE has a lot of armor, and the Swedish tank has a lot of mobility. So simply the fact that one of them decided to waste his armor, and the other tank decided to waste his mobility, really put my team in a bad spot.
We didn't penetrate their armor.
And unfortunately, at this point, out of the 3 surviving tanks on my team, I was the only one in a position to confront the enemies. ultimately a very dire situation. Consider my armor is essentially useless against these enemies, and my vision's kind of poor, and my gun, despite being pretty decent, is not quite good enough to make this a fair fight.
Track hit. We didn't even scratch them.
But ultimately, I successfully resetted the enemy T-95 and the enemy Swedish tank, and then carefully side-scraped my tank in position and engaged an enemy AT-15 Tier 10 British tank destroyer with obviously sufficient penetration to go through my hull. Ultimately, the side-scraping did wonders because 90mm side armor and space armor allows the side of my tank to thwart enemies.
Bail out. This vehicle is had it.
But unfortunately, my luck runs out because I rushed too hard to try to reset the cap. I could have side-scraped, but then, due to soft cover and due to the fact that, the vision of my tank's kind of poor, I couldn't get a hold of the enemy's positions, so I had to peek and spot. But there's not enough I can do. And unfortunately, the campers on my team showed up just in time to watch me die and watch the team lose the game. Anyway, special bonus points if you know where the soundtrack came from, as usual. So both games, I got first class. So in terms of damage or XP, they are not anywhere near amazing. But, I think it's more important to be consistent and do your part than to, be unreliable but hope for anything outrageous. And so I did almost 5k and bounced 3.5k in the 1-2-1. I carried the game. Too bad I'll need to allow the campers and patters and bots and farmers and, apathetic idiots on my team to get a win they don't really deserve. Meanwhile, in the IS3 game, despite being bottom tier, I was topping XP and damage. And despite the game being a loss, I got a Defender award and got rewarded for courageous resistance. Too bad it's not enough. But ultimately, perhaps it will never be enough. What a disappointment. GG Wargaming.